Tonight of the series, The Last Years of the Old Order Israel and the Jews in 1962 to 66. And, of course, tonight is a doozy because it's called Where is Yusla, the State of Israel and Jewish Religion, 1962 to 66. And I keep getting these feelings every time I go through material. We can barely scratch the surface on this stuff. As we talk about Efo Yusla, the State of Israel and Jewish Religion in 62-66, it's a big topic. And I cannot cover the state of Israel and the Jewish religion in 1962-66. But as is always the case with history, what you do is you take a few of the facts and you try to make a sort of a mystical argument that if you understand these set of phenomena, you can kind of get a feeling, the argument is, a feeling for what was going on in this particular subject during those years. I start out by pointing out that the United States of America is the only country in the world with separation of church and state. And if you know that or not, there is no other country in the world that has legal separation of church and state. I didn't say they're not democratic, because there are plenty of countries that are democratic. But the concept of a legal separation of church and state is only American. And obviously it goes back to the guys who wrote the Constitution and things like that. Other countries have different arrangements. I would not say Great Britain is a fascist state, it's a democratic state. But as you all know, the Queen of England is officially the head of the church. And besides that, the British government does subsidize and does indeed undertake to control, if they're up to par, a religion, as does every country in the world except the U.S. government, and although they kind of do here also. The reason I put NICKY Morgan up there, she's the current, under Cameron, she's the education secretary, and she's the one who's implementing policies which basically I approve of, and that is, Derry said like this: we're not going to have Muslim schools where they just teach jihad, you understand? And we're going into the schools. The government is going in like Big Brother into the schools to find out what exactly they're teaching and ram it down their throats and hire and fire and do all this sort of thing. As you know, the Jews are often collateral damage, so I'm sure everybody here reads the paper, and they're now forcing, the government is saying that every school, including the religious schools, have to teach another religion in addition to their own. And in the case of the Jewish schools, I'm talking about the Hasidic schools and all the stuff, the government is forcing them to teach, in addition to the Jewish stuff, another one. I don't know how this is going to turn out. And the chief rabbi of England picked Islam over Christianity, for better or worse. And it's going to be an interesting day over there, with this hits bells and Satmar, But anyway, you see, you can read the paper. I don't know if you follow this sort of thing. What I'm trying to say is like this: there is no shame or effort to separate the church from the state. The state is in charge. As long as you behave yourself, do what you want. When you don't behave yourself like it's going with the jihadi business, then the state says, we won't interfere. One of the problems you have in America is we all want money for the private schools, but if all the money goes for private schools for the jihad business, so then what are we funding? You understand? And then you tell me you can't tell, America has a tradition of a decentralized education system with local boards of education, as you possibly know. America has a tradition. The government doesn't really poke its nose into what's taught in the private schools. They can if they want, but they generally don't. But this is changing because it's a new world. As long as it's just, Christianity and Judaism, big deal. The government doesn't really care what Satmar does. You understand? Not really. State of New York. But because they weren't planning to overthrow the government. But now you have all this big Islamic set of schools coming in with the Wahhabis and the ISIS supporters and who knows what. The U.S. government say this, we need a culture change. So I'm just trying to tell you that when you get to Israel, as I'll do in a minute, they don't have separation of church and state. No country in the world has separation of church and state except the U.S. In Western countries, now listen closely, in Western countries, religion, which has always meant the difference between Catholic and Protestant, is not that big of a deal in terms of national identity. Secular identity trumps. Now, once upon a time that wasn't true. And if you go back a couple hundred years ago, you had the wars of religion and the 30-year wars and all this kind of stuff. And A shechted B and B shechted A. That happened long ago. But we're past that in the Western world. Okay? Happened long ago. We're past that. It doesn't really matter in England whether you're a Catholic or Protestant. Or even in France or Germany or places like that. It makes a little bit of a difference. And it does. But not in a significant kind of way. And my point is, an Italian feels Italian, whatever its religion is. A Swiss feels a Swiss, whatever religion, generally speaking. A German feels a German, whatever. There's a little nuance here and there between this type of Catholic, this type of Protestant. I get that. But overall, it hasn't made a difference. That, what I just described is what we call the Western tradition. But in the Middle East, it's different. Religion trumps secular nationality as the primary and real mode of self-classification. You go in all these countries, say, what are you? You know, if they're not just being politically correct, they'll say, I'm a Shiite, I'm a Sunni, I'm a Druze, I'm a Christian, I'm a Maronite, I'm a Jew. That's the real one, right? That's why Syria and Iraq have never really been countries. Not from the time they were founded after the First World War. Look at the, here's your, religious division. I think this is the Sunni part, and, this is the Shia part, and this is a piece of the Druze, and so on and so forth. By the way, you look at this map, you understand where the ISIS comes from, because they've been ruled by the Assad dynasty, which is not Sunni Muslim, and the overwhelming majority is, and they don't like it. Where is the ISIS located? Right there in Syria, as you know. This is why. You see? What about the fact that Assad and the other regimes have been saying, oh, that doesn't matter. What matters is a Syrian national identity. Baloney. And look at Iraq. Same thing, This part is the Sunni, I think, and this the Shiite, and whatever, and the Kurds and so forth. Notice that's your primary mode of identity. And if somebody like a foreign statesman like Woodrow Wilson, these people stuck them all together, it's a bad shidduch. We all know this. Now, in pre-1948, the primary identity in Palestine was religious, even if you're not religious. The way they identified you, right? Whether you're Ben Gurion or the Ger Rebbe was, you're all part of what they call the Yishuv. It's this type of Jew or that type of Jew. It wasn't that there's a Palestinian identity. The country was actually quite riven precisely along religious lines, whether you want to, admit it or say it or not. You understand? No, the category was Jew. The category was Muslim. The category was Christian. Now, the Muslim Christian tried to amalgamate and call it an Arab identity, but really it was a lie. The Christians, it was primarily the struggle of the Palestinians against Zionism. In those years, it was primarily a religious struggle, which is why the leader was the leader of the Muslim church, if I can use that term, in Palestine. Now, there were Christians over there, but if you know what happened, and I spoke about this in the past, the Christians, like today, followed a mufti out of fear. And perhaps some conviction. George Antonius was a famous Christian Palestinian, you'd say today, who wrote the book The Arab Awakening. He was a highly educated guy in the 20s and the 30s. And he had a job with the High Commissioner in Palestine, and he was a spokesman for the Christian Palestinians and the Arab, Palestinian secular Arab nationalism. He had to follow the Mufti 100%. That's what happened. As long as he went along, he's okay. If he will disagree, one of the squads will bump him off. That's how it goes. Now, by the way, it so happened he hated the Jews passionately, and he dropped that at a young age, which is fine with me, and his wife kept up the cause for many years afterwards. She lived in East Jerusalem and in Jordan, Kay Antonius and so forth. And these are people, as we know, as part of the Palestinian condition, that even the Christians, the Palestinian Christians, hate the Jews as much as or more than they hate the Muslims. They're not interested in the argument, hey, if the Muslims win, it'll be worse for you. They don't think like that. Okay? So all I'm trying to say is religion is the number one factor, whether you like it or not, in terms of self-identity. After 48, what happens? The Palestinian Arabs are inside the state of Israel. But what are they? Are they Palestinians? No, they're Israelis. Point. He says, ask Ben Gurion, there are no Palestinians here, they're Israelis. What are they? They're of different religions, that's all. There's the Jewish Israelis, is the Muslim Israelis, if you want to call it that, the Christian Israelis. Of course, they're Arab speakers. He's not stupid. He knows that. But they're not one big group. They're several. This is a basic strategy that I've spoken about before of Dovid Katz, divide and conquer, which was a fundamental feature of the Ben Gurion system. So, there's Druze, there's Christians, there are Muslims. They're not the same. And by the way, there is truth in that. You get it? The Druze don't really feel that they're brothers with the Muslims. The Muslims would like to kill them. They probably would like to kill the Muslims if they were strong enough. That's how it goes. The Christians in Israel are in a hot spot. If they really felt that Israel will go on forever, which they never will feel, then they'd probably side with the Jews. But they're afraid the Muslims will come back one day and they'll kill us if we sided with the Jews. What I'm trying to tell you is it's religion as the unit of self-identification. So for Ben Gurion and company, it was a matter of state policy to regard Israeli non-Jews in terms of their religious communities. So there's not a bunch of Arabs over here. There's different groups. There's the Christians, which is one thing. There's the Muslim, which is another thing. There's the Druze, which is a third thing. The Circassians, the Baha'i, and whatever other group. And if we could persuade, any of these groups to subdivide even more, believe me, the government would fund it. They'd be happy to do so. Okay? Now, these religions that I'm speaking about are not merely collections of theologically like-minded individuals, which is what you have in America. Okay? What are the Presbyterians? What are the Catholics? They're collections of theologically like-minded individuals. But rather in the Middle East, they're still old-fashioned, autonomous, coercive communities. And Ben-Gurion did not wish to abolish that. He does, however, treat the different communities differently. So the Christians, for example, who are quite small in number, are readily granted their traditional hierarchies with whom the regime was able to negotiate on behalf of their flock. So we talked about this guy last year, Archbishop Hakim. When it's the Christians, it's a machaya, because the Christians are always a hierarchy. There's always somebody at the top, a pope, a bishop, an archbishop, a patriarch, or whatever you want to call it. And that makes it a machaya for the government, because you make a deal with him, and that applies to all the followers, because they define themselves hierarchically. You understand? If you make a deal with the Catholic Church, the Catholics are going to go along with that. So that's what about the Muslims? Now, what I'm trying to show you is what a lot of people don't get, most people, and that is, why does Ben-Gurion care about the Jewish religion? Why does he want to be part of Jewish religion? Because the Jewish religion is one of many religions in the state of Israel. And the government had to develop for its own purposes a certain kind of set of policies towards religious groups. And it couldn't do it only for the Jews and not for the others, or the others not for the Jews. And therefore, they had to apply it across the board. And so what do you do with the Muslims who were in Israel after 1948? What are they? Now, there were plenty of Muslims in Israel, tens of thousands. They would like, if they could get it, a national church with a hierarchy headed by the Grand Mufti, all paid for by the government, just like the Christians. That's what you had under the British for 30 years. Let me explain. When the British took over after the First World War and set up the mandate, so they had the first High Commissioner, Herbert Samuel, and one of the things he did was pass a law in which it said all the Muslim communities in Palestine now belong to one entity, and it's headed by a top official, and he gets to appoint everybody and run the budget. And that guy's called the Grand Mufti. He just made a big mistake by picking the guy that he picked, and we all know it was a terrible situation. But the theory was that the Christians have a hierarchy, and the Jews, as you know, they created a chief rabbinate, and so similar, they wanted to create a Muslim chief rabbinate, so to speak, and have a single structure that united all the Muslims, and he did too good of a job of it, let's put it that way. Now, the Muslims, now the state of Israel happens in 1948-49, they say, okay, get another Grand Mufti. You get it? Now, let's pick your own guy, but set us all up, so we should be organized as a state to represent the interests of the Muslim religion, administer the Muslim property, karka, there was plenty, as I'll tell you in a second, and so forth. This is what they wanted to do. Or, if you don't do that, they said to Ben-Gurion, let's have separation of church and state. So we Muslims can do our own thing, and voluntarily we'll unite under one national group, like they do in the United States. They'll have power that way. After all, in this country, the religious groups have plenty of power, don't they? Now, if they're able to organize their followers, the right-wingers, to this winger, that winger, they're able to do it. Ben-Gurion said from day one, no Grand Mufti, thank you very much. We are not going to do this. I'm not appointing there was a mistake to put this guy in the first place, and we're not getting any successor. I don't want the state of Israel have to deal with a guy like that, because then what's he going to do? Attack Israel, bring in the media, cause us nothing but trouble. Why should I do that? Such an official will be able to oppose the state of Israel in the name of Islam. Thanks. That'll be terrible PR. So who needs it? So don't appoint a guy like this. Moreover, such an official or such a church could claim the Waqf territory, of which there was a tremendous amount of abandoned territory. I mean, when the Arabs left or were kicked out in 48, close to 1 million people, there's a lot of karka and property which belonged to what they call the Hegdish, that belonged to the Islamic religion that was originally set up for the widows and orphans and things like that. They have their own culture with their own traditions of tzedakah and Hegdish like we do. And it's extensive, it's all over Israel. And Israel, frankly, wanted the territory. Right? They wanted it. And so, by using bureaucratic and administrative measures, which I don't blame him, he simply was able to prevent any Muslim entity from even happening during the Ben-Gurion era. And perhaps even down till today. There's no such thing as a single entity of all the Muslims recognized in law to represent the totality of Islam in Israel, certainly in Ben-Gurion's time. To prevent all this, he had the state closely control Islam. The state under Ben-Gurion appointed the clergy. You hear what I said? The government appointed the clergy. So you want to be a rabbi or a qadi or some mosque or something like this, the government had to appoint you. And believe me, they made it their business to appoint people who are not scholars or impressive figures. They just wanted factotums, people know how to run the services, do the life cycle events. Nobody's a chashuva Islamic scholar. The state prevents the establishment of any Grand Mufti, the establishment of any yeshivas. They would not, Ben-Gurion would not allow any madrasas. You understand? They're not going to let it. This state prevents any gathering of representatives of Muslim communities, so that by using administrative measures, they were able to abort it, to prevent it from even happening in the first place, rather than have it happen and then have trouble from them. That was the Ben-Gurion policy. In other words, the state used its power to successfully prevent an Israeli Islam from getting its act together and challenging the state. The state of Israel seizes many mock lands, and there's no official body representing the Israeli Islam who can complain about it. This, my friends, is how they ran the show. So in general, Islam during the Ben-Gurion era was anemic during Ben-Gurion and Eshkol time. It was anemic up to the 67 war, and that's what they liked. Because they said, listen, if you leave alone, they'll rise up against us, they'll make a fifth column, we'll have the trouble we have now with people stabbing everybody in the streets. I'm not going to have that. So that's the way they looked at it. From all this, we see, I would argue, why a Mapai secular regime wanted to maintain a legal connection with religion, even though it meant funding religion. Because funding is how you control. Indeed, the giving and withholding of funding were precisely the tools of control. You understand? So that's why Israel did not have separation of church and state. And on the other hand, even as a secular regime, they did want to fund, but they want to fund the right people, the right time, withhold from people they held with the right time also. This helps us understand why in the case of Judaism, Ben-Gurion did not simply separate the church and state, why he didn't decline to fund parallel school systems. You understand? I'll say it again. Ben-Gurion, for whatever reason we've talked about in the past, he set up, in his time, he presided over the establishment of a system in which there's 3 public school systems, correct? There's Mamachti, Dati, and the Chinuch Hatzmoi, and that sort of thing. So, that means that's all funded by the taxpayers. It's parallel school systems. You get it? The parents have the choice. I'm talking about under the law. You can send your kids to a secular school, that's totally up to you. You can send your kids, again, at tax for free, a public school, to Mizrahi type school, religious Zionist, Kippas Regav if you want. Or you can you can send your kid for the younger grades to go to school. Right? And again, it's free or just it's paid for by the government. So thus starved of funds, if he had not done this, for whatever reason, it would have been hard for religious institutions, including Jewish ones, to be created or survive. But they couldn't make it on their own. Because expenses, anybody here, and I'm sure in this audience we must have people connected with TA, Beis Yaakov, and Arizona. It's a fortune. No, I'm saying to run an institution costs a fortune. You understand? People don't understand. It's big expenses. The food, the teachers, the building. After all the jokes, to run the lights, it costs. But they couldn't do it. Okay, but Ben-Gurion wanted to make sure that Judaism would never get out of control and turn into a threat to the state, because religion always has this potential. Agreed? Religion can always get out of control, be a threat to the state. Haven't we all read this headline this past week with the wedding? You all know what I'm talking about. With the radical right wing, they're stabbing the baby and all that. It has the power to get out of control. Okay? So, in addition, Ben-Gurion and his company were heirs to the Jewish political tradition of Eastern Europe and not of Central Europe. They were not Hirschian, let's put it that way. Saint Raphael Hirsch, perhaps you remember, espoused the idea that the religious, in his case the Orthodox, should, on principle, separate and have a separate community, a parallel community with the others. Because the others are treif, they won't believe in the Torah. And because of the Torah, any Jewish institution they talked about is ipso facto going to be a treif one. And Hirsch, who had a rich congregation, put his money where his mouth is. So let's put it this way. If they had this in Baltimore, there wouldn't be any protests about the JCC opening on Saturday. Say, the heck with them. Make our own JCC. Run the place on Yom Kippur if you want. Make our own, JCC with our own swimming pool, our own everything, and our own schools, and our own hospital, by the way. The heck with Sinai Hospital. Let them eat treif all they want. Or Amin Toda. This was his approach. Not in Eastern Europe. And Zionism rose out of Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, for a variety of reasons, I'm not going to repeat it, I did in the past, that didn't happen. Instead, what everybody said was, Kol Yisrael Chaverim, whether we like it or not. And we hate each other, and we cuss each other out, all the rest of it, we're all part of a family. Nobody likes their cousins. Raise your hand if you like your cousin. Anyway, how many liars do we have? I see 2, okay. Right? Everybody, this is the way it goes, but we're all going to do it. So in Eastern Europe, they had Kehillas once upon a time down to the Holocaust. And there were legal institutions, for example, in Poland, Lithuania, places like that, Hungary. There were legal institutions. They had real elections, and they were in charge of actual budgets. Okay, sort of like running the Associated, you might say, but there was mamish elections. Not like here where it's a self-perpetuating oligarchy. There were actually were elections, And what used to happen was so and so many votes went to the religious party, and so many went to the secular party, and so went to the socialist party. When the votes are all over, let's say it's Warsaw, or Lodz, or Vilna, or Kovna, or something like this. So this is the system. When it's all over, so now let's say there are 25 seats on the executive board, or 50 seats. So 10% went to this group, and 10% went to that group, and 20% went to this group, and 30% went to this group. And when it's all over, they got to form coalitions to pass, resolutions and use the budget, raise money, and so forth. And so in that kind of environment, what happened was the religious and non-religious had to cooperate one way or the other, whether they like it or not. And so what they usually would used to do in Eastern Europe was what they ended up doing in Israel, which is the religious groups, you give them in charge of the cemetery and of the mikveh and of the religious school and the kashrus and all the rest of it. And, the big bucks will run for our sorts of things. And that's how they did it, like it or not. So that bespeaks a culture in which they're all out to get us, therefore we have to hang together, and despite our differences, we have to work it out. Like I say, I have to work it out with my cousins. And, kol yisrael chaverim, if I can use that term. And this is, as they say before, the cultural context that emerged out of all this. And therefore, when Israel became a state, it's only natural that even secularists, Ben-Gurion, all the rest of us said, we should bring that institution into Israel. And that's exactly what they tried to do. The Mizrahi should be in charge of the religion, they should be in charge of the mikvahs, of the cemeteries, of the rabbis, the shochet, that sort of thing. And for the rest of it, please leave us alone. Don't tell me what to do. Stripped of all the verbiage and reduced to its essence, the Mapai had no problem funding religion in every area of life except education, because that's the dangerous one. So Rav Maimon, who was Ben-Gurion's best friend, he was a minister of religion. There were no yeshivas, as you'll see, not really. And so he said we want to have laws that the Shabbos should be the official holiday, and that the government should keep kosher in the institutions, and that they should. It's Ben-Gurion's a fine, big deal. And even if it comes at the blue laws and things like that, can't open the store, big deal. That was a price he was willing to pay. You see, in the early years of the state, there weren't any Mizrahi yeshivas. You hear what I said? There weren't any Mizrahi yeshivot. Members of groups like Bnei Akiva didn't go to yeshiva. Yeshivas were not part of the Mizrahi sociology or ecology. Later it changed, but not I'm talking about. At the most, the boys and the girls who really were interested attended teacher seminaries. So the famous great Rab Zeman taught in the teacher seminary, in Mizrahi teacher seminary. You understand? Because there weren't any Mizrahi. It's just interesting. Here's a person, if you want to get down to it, who could have given easily a share, and Lakewood and all that stuff. But being in Israel when he was, that was what was out there. And my point is that religious Zionism during the Ben-Gurion era agreed with the Mapai in everything except religion. It was like a Mapai light, and the Mafdal, the religious party, the religious Zionist party, was essentially kind of a branch of the Mafdal, of the Mapai, And so that's why they're always together in a coalition. Yes, they quarreled over money, and they quarreled over this, that, and the other, and who's a Jew, but the little quarrels covered up the fact that 99% of the stuff they agreed on. Accordingly, Ben-Gurion and company were prepared to grant concessions, especially about blue laws and Shabbos and Gerus and marriage and divorce to these groups. And the feeling was, and he wasn't necessarily wrong, listen closely, within a generation or two, the religious Zionists, as they are now, will no longer be religious. Right? That's what he figured. But the kids at that time were coming out of the seminaries and Bnei Akiva, all the rest of it. After a few years, it became quote-unquote normal. You understand? Even if we fund their school system, the secularization process will take place. Hence, the willingness to make concessions to the National Religious Party. That's a basic feature of the Ben-Gurion era. But now we come to the other side. The other shoe is going to drop. On the other hand, the Haredim were different. Right? They were different. The Haredi yeshiva is actually a highly subversive institution. That's what it is. Right? That's it doesn't claim to be anything other than that. It always has been. You understand? It has been. Let me tell you this way. The whole America says you should do this, and the yeshiva in Lakewood says you should do that. The whole America says you should work and do such and such, and the Lakewood, I'm using that as an expression, says you should do that. Openly and proudly and boldly. Right? The whole America now says you have gay marriage, the yeshiva says gay marriage is wrong. You understand? Those are countercultural institutions. That's how they self-define. You get it? And, yeah, people don't like it. Okay, that's what happens when you have a countercultural institution that takes its role seriously and is subversive of the general culture, whether in America, the West, or in the state of Israel. It is a subversive institution. Because they said, listen, we're pushing a culture that long predated any of your ideas. Okay? Who gave you permission to be Mechal Shabbos, so to speak? You get it? And we haven't changed the message, they argue. The message is still the same. You're the one who changed. It always has been. So the cultural subversive nature of the Haredi yeshiva is a very powerful force. So even though they look like old rabbis, actually they're active subversives of a culture. See, the laughing, I get it, but the laughing you're doing, I'll say another sentence, you won't laugh anymore. Now they're like the biggest group growing in Israel. All of a sudden, all the people who smile turn and nod their heads. You understand? You get it? So, Ben-Gurion was quite aware of this half century ago, 60 years ago, and he did not agree in 1948 to fund the yeshivas. You hear what I said? He would not fund the yeshivas. He did find it necessary for coalition reasons to fund to a limited degree the Chinuch Atzmo, the Beis Yaakov system. The Beis Yaakov did have a high school, and that turned out to be a very subversive sort of institution because that meant that you could have a whole network of schools in which girls who are super frum can find government jobs with pensions and health benefits and all the rest of it, and that created a core of people who could marry yeshiva guys. I mean, people have done research on that recently. But basically, there were no Haredi secondary schools in terms of secondary education. If there were, he didn't fund it. He wouldn't pay for yeshiva katanas, 9th grade, 10th grade, all the rest of it. And not only because there wasn't money around, he didn't want to perpetuate this. Yeshivot, which are secondary and post-secondary institutions of totalizing transformation, because that's what they are, were few in those early years. Ben-Gurion knew about their nature. He freed them from the draft, since most of the Haredim were serving in the army anyway, contrary to popular belief. If you go back in Ben-Gurion's time, I put the Ger Rebbe up there. The Ger Hasidim all went to the army. Most of the Hasidim, the ones I know about, all went to the army. You understand? It was a few people in those times, very few, that were learning yeshiva full-time that weren't going in the army. Most people, if they were a good, all the rest of it, I know, you probably might know people also. They were a good types, all the rest of it, and they said they put their 2 years in, with 3 years in the army. You understand? So it wasn't a big kind of phenomenon. The hot button issue in those days was Gius Banos and not Gius Banim. Right? Drafting the girls. Here's where the famous Rosh Hashiva, that's Risser Zalman Meltzer right there, and that's, I can't remember who, but that's Porsche. He said these are big Rosh Hashivas who went to see Ben-Gurion over the girl drafting, not the boy drafting. And that was a big issue in those days. Ben-Gurion is quite aware, because he's prime minister, of the subversive nature, the subversive potential of the Haredim. In good Eastern European style, he sought to bridge gaps. You understand? Like they did in Vilna and Kovna and all the rest of those. How can we make this work together? Here, I just picked up a meeting of Ben-Gurion with these Rosh Hashivas, I just said before. Take a look at what's said over there. A rare glimpse in former Israel consists of a 1953 document, and that's what it is. It was Mayor Karelitz and who is it? PESACH Frank, that was the other one. These are famous Rabbanim of yesteryear. Some of you know I'm talking about, not very famous. PESACH Frank began the meeting by saying Jewish law prohibited women from being drafted in the army, any kind of nation service. We request you nullify this idea, and so on and so forth. God forbid, divine consequence of drafting the girls, and silence reigned in the room. Rabbi Frank wept, and the other ones, it made it heart-breaking sighs. Now, PESACH Frank was not even the good, to be perfectly honest. I mean, he was a friend of Rav Kook. You get it? He was the Rav of the old Yerushalayim. But nevertheless, and I might say, he had a son who was in the Mapai, I think, or the Mapam, a Chaver Knesset. But he didn't hold that way, you see? And adding Karelitz told Ben-Gurion with great love for a holy land, you're going to live in trembling, what will happen over here and all the rest of it. And Ben-Gurion acknowledged that he was sitting among greatness. I sit before you, great, all the rest of it. And somewhere along the line, I can't see it so well, but you can. He says, I regret myself, I never learned in yeshiva, I never learned Torah. You see, and I know there's a bad thing. So he tried to, points like this, tried to bridge a gap. You understand? Now, it turned out that it wasn't exactly bridgeable, was it? You see? That's the thing. Because by him bridging gap is, what does it take for you guys to agree to what I'm saying? And, well, that's usually how bridging gaps works. And, when are you going to see how right I am? And the fact of the matter is, what I'm trying to get across is that there was no common ground. Later on, Ben-Gurion met with the Chazon Ish. This is very famous. And he saw there's no common ground on the hashkafa level. There's no violence. It's a subversive attitude that's not violent at all, right? It has, the Chazon Ish, they never said that nobody should lift a finger to do anything. They're against violence. But nevertheless, mentally speaking, it's a complete subversive rejection. I have in front of me, there's a famous speech where Ben-Gurion went to, he's in the Chazon Ish's house. You see, it's a very simple room. He didn't even have a chair. They sat on the bed, you know. There's a very, lived a poor lifestyle on purpose. And just want to read you a slight bit I pulled off from a website the other day where Yitzhak Navon, who later on was the president of Israel, if you know his career, he's Sephardi from Yerushalayim, grandson of Machne Ephraim, or a descendant, and he was Ben-Gurion's secretary. And he was with him when he went to see the Chazon Ish. Okay? He's a Sephardi, but educated with the Hebrew University. That's who he is. And like I say, I'll just read you the highlights that I highlighted. And he said, "Lidvara boto zman omda perkas ara saviv sugyat gios banosh." This was the big fight at that time was drafting the girls. And he said, "I came into a house, Molei Sfarim." It was a house full of books, and you can see it's not a fancy house, no furniture. A little guy, the Chazon Ish with intelligent eyes. Kibel Ben-Gurion b'sever panim yavos. He greeted Ben-Gurion very cordially, and Ben-Gurion immediately said, "Basi elecha l'shol otcha eich nuchal lechyot ba'aretz Yehudim datim Yehudim she'enam datim." How are we going to live in this country? The religious is not religious. What are we supposed to do? Without blowing up. What's your plan? How is this? Now, isn't this interesting? This is 1953, which is 50 years before all the junk that we're going through now. The country's full of people with different ideas, different hashkavas. How are we going to all coexist? And the Chazon Ish answered according to this, Yesh halacha. It's a famous thing is if there are two camels and one's laden and one's the other one laden, one has to give way for the other. Basically, the idea being like this: that the frum Jews have substance and not from substance. So you should accommodate us. That's basically what it boils down to. And Ben-Gurion said like this: we're a gamal b'li klum, you know. Atach choshev shal gamal hazeh ein lemasa. Do you think this camel pointing himself is not carrying anything? Habitachon yashvut haklitat aliyah zelo masa. Aren't we doing something? Bringing in people and setting up the country and immigration and national security. Zelo nakra mitzvot. It's not a mitzvah also to protect the country. And the Chazon Ish said like this: B'schus she'anu lomdim Torah, atem yecholin lasot ma she'atem rotzim. Our position is it all comes because we're learning, and that gives you the ability to do it. Therefore, you have to accommodate us. You have to give in to us. And, you know, Ben-Gurion went back and forth on this sort of thing. Eini mizalzel b'Torah, I'm not making fun of learning. In other words, without the army, nobody will learn because they'll kill everybody, the Arabs. And the Chazon Ish says, Eitz Chaim hi sama Chaim. The Torah will protect us. It's Eitz Chaim. And Ben-Gurion said, Gam haganah nefesh hi mitzvah. Right? Protecting life is also a mitzvah. Hallelujah. The dead do not praise God. But in other words, let's talk tachlis. How can we make this work? And the Chazon Ish says, Ani roeh chilul Shabbat. I see chilul Shabbat, which is not a little thing. You see? Anashim nosim liyam b'makom l'spal. Instead of going to davening on Saturday morning, people go to the beach. L'lmod Torah instead of davening, learning. Zem b'kamam zem v'zeh mezazeh nevesh l'orz avasina chilul Shabbat. To see this kind of chilul Shabbat in Eretz Avotenu is shocking. That's what he said. And Ben-Gurion said, just trying to give you a flavor over here of what eventually turned into a dialogue of the deaf. Notice it didn't work. You see? Ben-Gurion said, I don't travel, I don't go to the beach on Shabbos, right? God works hard all week. He wants to take a day off on Saturday. What's the problem if he goes to the beach? You can't force them to learn. No, if they wanted to, they could go to shul. They're choosing not to go. They are Jews, aren't they? If they don't go to beach, you think they go to shul. Okay? He said, I can tell, I live with the belief that one day they'll all keep Shabbos. They or their children or grandchildren, Viet Palo, and they will daven. You see? So it's two different hashkafot, as they say over here. And Gurion said, if they want to go, I'm not going to stop them. I'm against religious coercion and I'm against anti-religious coercion. Let everybody live the way they want to live. And so on and so forth. And in other words, the point is like this, as he puts it, which means it was an attempt at a dialogue, it wasn't a dialogue. And the reason is, for the same reason, if you want to be brutally frank about it, it's not possible to have a dialogue even today. It's a very politically incorrect thing I'm saying. I realize that, but nobody's looking. It's just you and me here. The fact is, from the Orthodox and the Nalzor coming from such different, what shall I say, a set of assumptions that neither one can hear or acknowledge the other one's set of assumptions. And when you can't do that, you can't have a dialogue. You understand? It's a tragedy, but it's a reality. So it's very politically incorrect. Nobody can go around saying that, and so we all lie. But nevertheless, that's what happens. But nevertheless, the American Jewry, for example, and the other Jewry, it's the absence of a dialogue. You see? It's one of the hallmarks, sad hallmarks of modern Jewish history. Okay, and it didn't happen overnight, but nevertheless, it did happen. And as you see, Ben Gurion discovered there's no common ground and there's no violence, but complete subversive business. Now, I got to tell you a story that I read the other day before I move on. In a book I saw about Michael Bazor wrote a book. Maybe you saw about the Israeli Special Forces, something like that. It brings into relief. I didn't bring the book with me, but do you all remember the 82 war in Lebanon? And I know most of you are too young to remember that. The 82 war in Lebanon. And do you all remember there was a certain point where Israel shot down 90 Syrian planes in 5 minutes? Right? There was a certain incident like that. That Israel invaded Lebanon, and then Syria sent SAM batteries, and by the time it's all over, the Gaza Syrian Air Force went and attacked Israel, and to their utter shock, they all got shot down in 5 minutes, 6 minutes. And Soviet Union, I remember, was shocked, and Ronald Reagan was shocked. Everybody they all shot over the Middle East. What happened over there? And this guy describes it. It turns out that the Weizmann Institute and all these math whizzes had worked out what we would call today some computerized program, and which could manage at the same time hundreds of aircraft and all that scientific stuff that I don't understand. And they're able to do it in such a way that nobody saw before, that they're able to handle such a multi-valence battle and with amazing results. And I read the story over here by the commander, Aviam Sella, who everyone became notorious for recruiting Jonathan Pollard. And he said, there we were in the bore in the pit in Tel Aviv, which is the Air Force headquarters, the Army, Air Force, the Defense Ministry, and the main guy running the whole thing, right? So I'll never forget. So the main guy running the thing was a Hasidic guy from Bnei Brak named Moshe Krauss. I don't know the guy, and sitting in Hasidic garb. This is what he writes. And he's one of these math wizards, like a Noam Alper type. He just knew how to. We never went to college, never went to any school, just went straight to yeshiva, and just had a natural genius for this sort of thing. And he devised the program and he operated it. And so here's a guy that personally shot down the Syrian Air Force, and in 5 minutes. And then he's got to go back to Bnei Brak because he doesn't want to be late for Seder, And he gets on a bus. And it's in the middle of the Lebanon war. And an Israeli lady in the Tel Aviv bus on the way to Bnei Brak is screaming at him and says, my son is in the army, and people like you contribute nothing to the national security. And he answers her, he says, it's not true. I learned Torah. So the Israeli, you can't make that up, So the Israeli reality, what can I tell you, in the religious sense, is kind of complex. By the late Ben Gurion era, which is what we're looking at, 62 to 66, this unbridgeable gap is just accepted as part of the landscape. It meant that the Haredim will own a small number of areas in Israel, Me'asharim, Geula, Bnei Brak, and that's it. The campus of the yeshivot. Everything else will be Israelis, either secular or religious Zionist. That was the reality of it. Everybody knows. If you want to see the ultra, go to Me'asharim. If you want to regular, you go to another neighborhood. The Mapai used its muscle to ensure that the masses of Sephardim would not enroll in the Haredi institutions. We talked about it last week. In the time of Eshkol and all that, and I know there are people here that can live through this. If you went to a Chinuch Atzmai school or yeshiva, your father could lose a job. You understand? You lose a job. Or you won't get a housing. They won't write you a little petek that you need, for help for an operation or something. This is the way the system was run. But it's a festering wound on the body politic, on the hope for a universal patriotism. You're saying Israel will not be like other countries, normal countries, let's put it that way, in which everybody kind of subscribes, at least all the Jews. With the Arabs, what do you want? It's never going to be that way. But you hope with the Jews, there'll be a universal patriotism because it's the only Jewish state. Not really, right? There will always be some Jews, right, and a growing number that will not subscribe to the Israeli patriotism, but will oppose it, as we just saw with the Chazon Ish, in principle, and regard it as a negative, or at least a bankrupt, a culturally, religiously, and intellectually bankrupt phenomenon. I'm talking about the state of Israel, my friends. And all this, of course, is the fruits of unilateralism, as I have tried to explain my best I could in previous years. These guys have the attitude, we were here first and we were doing so, all of a sudden you just decided to go this direction, you decided to start the reform movement, you decided to start Zionism, you decided to overthrow everything, you decided this, and we never agreed and we still don't, we never will. That's the way it goes. This radical gap in hashkafa will find its cultural iconic representation in the last years of Ben Gurion era, in Eifo Yasala. Where's the Yasala affair, which rocked Israel in the early 60s. Now, there's a lot of mythology in the books and the accounts. Notice they all lie. And only in the last 5-6 years has a lot of the truth come out. You understand? So, Israel wrote a book that's full of baloney, and the lady wrote a book. It is what it is. In Israel, they always like to spice it. The case involved BRESLOV Hasidim. You hear what I said? BRESLOV Hasidim. BRESLOV, like Chabad, is one of the few groups held out under Stalin. That's right. Yeah, I know what I'm doing. She taught this at the BRESLOV Rabbi, I only look stupid. I'm actually smart. You know that Stalin crushed Judaism. I don't have to tell you. So who's the one that held out? At BRESLOV and Chabad. I said, we know this. And maybe a few others, but they're famous. So these guys are tough. When I say they held out, as you'll see before I finish my remarks tonight, they went through the Gulag archipelago, they suffered the tortures, they did all the rest of it, and they're stark. They wouldn't give in. These are amazing people, okay? Now, as a matter of fact, the name of the family here is SHTARKES. Right? The SHTARKES family, unbelievably, but see, here's a guy who went, so the guy NACHMAN SHTARKES, he was under Stalin, he was in the camps. Okay? I want you, and these are people that did their doggone best to keep Shabbos in the camps. I mean, it's crazy. You understand? To keep kosher in the Gula, in the Siberia. You're not talking about regular people over here. The SHTARKES family unbelievably received permission to make Aliyah in the early 50s. Isn't that amazing? I think in 53 or something like that, right when Stalin died. So some Jews, not many obviously, it's only a trickle, were allowed to leave Russia, and he went to Israel. There was a grandfather, NACHMAN SHTARKES, who had sons. The two sons were active Lubavitchers in London and in Israel. And there's a lot of crossover, especially if you're in Russia, BRESLOV, Chabad, the whole point is to be Jewish. And so there's a lot of cross-referencing, so to speak. And so this is a guy who he himself is a BRESLOVer. He moves to Mea Shearim. His sons are Lubavitchers. Okay, the grandfather settles in Mea Shearim, which is, from hell to heaven. Okay, here's a person from hell to heaven. He went from Stalin to Mea Shearim. That itself is quite a story. And now, a few years later, he had a daughter. Notice his sons were already out. He had a daughter who was married to some dude named Alter Schumacher, who got permission to make Aliyah. So, unbelievably, not only did the parents got out in 53, but in 57, the children, the last of the kids, got out. The couple had a son named Yasala, born in 52 in the Soviet Union, and they had a daughter. And they weren't from back in Russia. That's what it is. It was under Stalin's time. So the two boys were they came Lubavitch, and the girl was not. And she married a guy, regular Jewish, just not religious. When the younger couple arrive in Israel, and it's 1957, the poverty of Ben Gurion era, they're unfamiliar with the country, they don't have anything. No, they get off the plane, the boat, and what do? Until you find yourself. And they had two kids, they don't know where to find jobs, where to live. So for the moment, they do what you and I would do. They dump the kids with the grandparents. Don't your children do that? Raise your hand. Right? Okay, proud, happy about that. So they dump the kids. Listen, the parents have an apartment in Mea Shearim. Apartment. In 57. Apartment. Don't laugh. Okay? Gotta think. So, the grandfather is glad to have an opportunity to stick some Yiddishkeit in the grandchildren. They've been under Stalin. Okay? And meanwhile, the girl goes to a Chabad, Beis Yaakov, I think it was Beis Rivka or something like that, and the boy to a Cheder. while the parents are looking, what kind of a job can he have, where can he find an apartment, and so on and so forth, like all the other Israelis who made Aliyah. Nothing wrong with that. After some time, the parents finally decide to settle in Cholon. They get an apartment there, which was a secular town, especially in those days. They come to pick up their kids, the son and the daughter. The daughter they get, but not the son. Neighbors in Mea Shearim, and the mother's brother, who's Lubavitch, in other words, the boy's uncle, convinced the grandfather that the parents are disillusioned with life in Israel and want to go back to Russia. Okay? Which wasn't true. But that's got nothing to do with anything. Right? They say, they're going to take him and take him back to the Soviet Union. Now, this isn't true, but it will become a basic part of the rumor mill which accompanies the story. Okay? That they're saving a kid, or they want to save a kid from fate worse than death, which is to go back to the Soviet Union. The grandfather, of course, is horrified. This kid has now been a frum kid, is going to go back to Russia, and encouraged by the neighbors, including the Dovid Katz, which for those of you who don't know, that's the right to go to there against Israel, resolves to save the child from the child's evil parents, from his own daughter. And I want to say this, Rabbi Pesach Frank was not from the Dovid Katz at all. He wasn't even exactly even a Yehuda. So in other words, he was what you would call a normal guy, politically, a great gaon and so forth. He was in the last year of his life. And he said, this is a terrible situation. Somebody has to save the child. Because the way he was told was, the parents are going to take him back to Russia. You understand? So this is the way it looked. So the boy is told, what is he, 6? He says, your parents are coming to take you to a terrible place where you will suffer greatly. But don't worry, we will save you from their evil clutches. Just cooperate from us, and we will hide you from their evil hands. And the 6-year-old boy cooperates. So in his mind, this is the uncle, the Lubavitcher, right? That's what he tells the nephew, and the others do also. So in the mind of the kid, he's like Anne Frank. He's hiding from the Nazis. This is what the kid thought, and that's why he cooperates. Well, now begins a Haredi underground railroad experience. Because you're taking a kid away from the parents, you have to hide him. Where are you going to hide him? And so first they go to Rishon, Lezion. You can see the play, right? The Rishon, and then later back to Jerusalem, then to Tzfat, then to Bnei Brak, and finally to KOMEMIUT. KOMEMIUT, if anybody remembers, it's a religious kibbutz, Polei Aguda kibbutz, which was famous that they keep Shemitah, back in the MAIMON. Okay? So in other words, they take them to different places to keep them ahead of the authorities. Now, wherever they go, they find help. So what does that mean? This bespeaks a sharp Haredi disconnect from the Zionist narrative. The people don't say this is kidnapping, even though by Israeli law it's kidnapping. Israeli law doesn't count. The state of Israel is a bunch of apokursim. This is a classic case in which they're trying to take a kid and ruin his neshama. You see what I'm saying? In other words, I'm trying to show you, it's a completely different narrative. It coexists in the country at the same time, but this case will bring it into sharp relief. Even if it hadn't happened, people would feel this way. But this case brings it into a very, very strong foreground. The angry parents, those the boy's mother and father, try to persuade and plead with the grandfather. Where is he? Tell us where he is. To no avail. He's not giving in. Because he's convinced that his daughter is lying. She married a non-frum guy. Anyway, she's no good, right? And she won't let him stay here, and so on and so forth. The parents go to the cops. And by the time the system works it through, the Israeli Supreme Court orders the grandfather to reveal the boy's whereabouts or face imprisonment for contempt of court. The grandfather said, never. You're going to threaten me? I've been worked over by experts. I've been through Siberia. Israel's going to threaten me? Are you kidding? This is a joke. Ben Gurion's worst jail is a summer camp. by start, that, right? He says, after I've been through that, and so they put him in jail for 2 years. Let me tell you something. He's in jail for 2 years. He gets 3 meals a day. No, they don't know who they're dealing with. Well, you get 3 meals a day. You get the daven. Probably they have a minion there. The truth is, the guards don't treat him bad. He's an old man. He doesn't mean bad. I'm going to tell you something. He wrote a letter to Ben Tzvi, the president of Israel. He said, you should give me a pardon. You know why? You want him to go back to Russia? This is against everything you stand for. There's a prisoner of conscience, so to speak. He doesn't see their way at all. I'm trying to show you. This case shows you the complete opposite spectrum, the complete opposite way of looking at things on the part of the two parties. That's why it's such a wonderful case for analyzing that. Okay? And the police are angry, and so they launch a 2-year national police manhunt in Israel. They look everywhere up and down. And in Israel, it's like France. There's one police department. There's not a bunch of different police departments. And so this is Ben Gurion's time. They pride themselves. They get their man. In other words, there's no Bill of Rights. There was no restraint on them breaking that house. Things like that. They definitely should find them. No Yasala. Didn't happen. The cops traced the kid to KOMEMIUT, this from Polia, go to Moshav, Kibbutz, but they're too late. The boy's gone. They find that the family that hid him, and they arrest him, and they find the town rabbi, the Rav, who sanctioned the hiding, who's also arrested, Rabbi MENDELSSON. I know this is probably a name that doesn't mean a lot to many of you, but if you were my age and old enough, they always used to talk about that's the place that keeps the Shemitah. He was Mr. Shemitah. You understand? He was renowned throughout the world. As a matter of fact, I remember many years ago that when they first started keeping the Shemitah, they had like the Chumash said, they got a double crop the next year or the year before. And the Chazon Ish wrote to me and said, you should be mafarsam this, you should publish this, because it says in the Torah, if you keep the Shemitah, you get a double crop the next year before. And the Israeli agriculture ministry gave them a certificate. They did indeed get it. So notice this is a person not associated with wild extremism like you find now, the price tag in the West Bank or anything like that. Quite the opposite. You see? He's a mild-mannered guy who's mainly into Torah mitzvahs, and in this case Shemitah and so on and so forth. He's not somebody associated with violent breaking of the law. And indeed, it was a whole mess, because he's a chashuv rav, and his arrest provokes protests from around the world. All these, in all the magazines, from Aguda in America. In other words, you're imprisoning a chashuv person who's not really a criminal. You understand? And it was a mess. This is not what Ben Gurion had in mind, because he's starting to look stupid. As the Yasala case, though, festers, so I'm talking about 1960, 61, 62. It brings to the fore latent tensions between the frum and the anti-frum. You get it? Because it wouldn't go away. And therefore it acted as an irritant on intra-Jewish, intra-communal feelings over here. Because after all, what trumps? The right to save a kid from assimilation, which was the traditionalist view, rescuing him, or the right of parents, which is the secular view, and the view of the whole Israel outside the Haredim. Parents, for crying out loud, right? Don't they have the final disposition of the child? And it becomes clear that Haredim are not Goris to Medina and the liberal view it espouses. Because people see, as far as the religions, the Haredim are concerned, they just don't see it like everybody else. They said, no, Yasel is right to me. Whoever took him is good. God bless him, and all the rest of it. The Chiloni society becomes increasingly enraged at the Haredim, and they started screaming at people in the street, kidnappers, fascists, barbarians, and it gets really rough at 61. By the time you get 61, all that, they would, hit people on the street. No, Efo Yasel, you bastards, tell what's going on. The Mamash talk very harsh over here. Got to be, things like that. And so it poisoned the atmosphere. Some people here will remember if you were in Israel at that time. And it started becoming a rallying cry for a war on the Haredim. If you can take the law into your hands, if you don't have to acknowledge the law, why should we? Why can't we kill you? Why can't we burn down your institutions? What's against the law? You don't open the law. You understand? In other words, it's called the fundamental, grounding of the consensus, which is necessary for any civilized society to be called into question. If you talk to say what you're saying, you don't hold from anything, so I don't have to hold from you. Why can't I smash your car? Why can't I do whatever I want? Why the heck are we funding you? Why are we allowing you to dodge the draft? And it got so bad that the regular rabbis said, I guess this is no good. The Moetzes Gedolei Torah, the head group of the Aguda, they said, Laman Hashem, return Yasel to the parents. I'm talking about the Panavisha Rav, the Shabbat. These are famous Orthodox rabbis, and they had a lot of, you'd think that they had a lot of influence. The Panavisha Rav, of course, is associated with, notice these guys come from a different approach. There's the Rav Kahneman and the Panovich Rav with Gorin and a bunch of army officers taking the Panovich to give him a day of the Yarchi College, try to expose him. That's a different approach. You understand? We don't need this, what's going over here. However, when there are no responses from the kidnappers, so the public starts to understand, Shema Mino, it's not a Torah Karta, it's Lubavitch or those groups, because they don't listen to your good rabbis. You understand? In other words, when big Rabbanim came out and said, you should give him back, and nobody listens, so you see over here, it's not from the group that listens to those types. He's a sellout. Rabbi Levin from the Aguda, the Itchamar Levin, who was the Aguda representative, he's like Uncle Tom, you know, to these people. You know, they take money from the government, they support Ben Gurion, all the rest of it. It's you know, a matter of who your creds are. And so tension builds in Israel, and it might turn into a civil war just at the peak of the threat from Nasser. This is what we talked about last week, right? With the or 2 weeks ago, with the missiles and the German scientists and all that stuff. This is exactly when this is happening in Israel, naturally. Okay? So little by little, it becomes clear to the cops that the Haredim have, and in this case the Neturei Karta types, so the ones that don't listen to Aguda, have smuggled Yossel out of the country despite the Mapai police state. This is really smart because they used to control the airport and who goes in, who goes out. And like I say, there's no personal rights. Some people will remember Israel in those good old days. They really give you a hard time at the airport and at the what's that? It still is. Not like it was. Not like it was. You know that. I mean, not like it was. You know, they used to. Oh boy. Anyway, how'd they get him out? How'd they do it? And basically, if they did it, it's a certain way of saying, jump in a lake. I'll be polite. Jump in a lake to the state. So clearly, one man's kidnappers is another person's SCARLET Pimpernel. That's what's happening over here, right? This was my mother's heartthrob in Czechoslovakia in 1935. No, but remember SCARLET Pimpernel? He was a hero. He was saving people from the cops. Sure, he's saving from the guillotine, from the bad government. So one person's kidnapper is another person's SCARLET Pimpernel. In March of 1962, in the middle of the whole Flash Gordon thing that we talked about last week, when Israel's freaking out over death rays and who knows what, Ben Gurion gets involved. He says, the threat to the fabric of the society is too great. Okay? And he says, we have to find Yossel at all costs. And so it's become an existential crisis, and he calls in the MOSSAD. Israel, who was, in those days, the Mamuneh, he was in charge of the FBI and the CIA. Notice, he was in charge of everything. So the centralized police power, which is absolutely characteristic of the Ben Gurion estate. And so you're going to have like a kind of a Jewish version of the Day of the Jackal or something like that, in which it's the government with all of its resources versus the ingenuity of the individual perpetrator. And that's what makes it a fascinating story. Ben Gurion tells Israel this is an existential crisis. And anyway, you found EICHMANN. If you found EICHMANN, you ought to be able to find the kid. You understand? And Israel took it real personal. And he said, the Mounties always get their man, you know what they say? And Israel says, we're going to do it. Right? It becomes a certain obsession with him. We're going to make this happen. Now, I want to be clear about this. They did do it, and it didn't take them long. It went from March 10th, 1962 to July 1st, 1962. They found him less than 3 months. Okay, so they're good. You get what I'm saying? When they put their mind to it, it's not like it went on for years. All right? Now, how this happened, the number 2 at the MOSSAD, TZVI AHARONI, he said, he's over there. These are the guys that were, they look like schleppers. They weren't schleppers. Each one could kill you, you know. This is the MOSSAD. He said this is a misuse of the resources. We have to watch NASSER. We have to watch the Russians. We have to watch the Palestinians. We ain't got time to run after some Hasidic kid and someone else. And Ben Gurion, this is no Ben Gurion. It's my call. And the Rosh HaMemshalah, I'm giving the orders, not you. And I say this is important. I'm not interested in your opinion. It's my opinion. We're going to do it. And so he still had that power, you know, Ben Gurion. And so they did it. So Israel flies to Europe, and he assembles all his agents, and basically drop everything. Hear that? Drop everything, and find Yossel. So that's what. So I want you to understand. Stop bugging the Egyptian embassy in Vienna. Stop following this double agent in Rome. Stop doing the thing forget the German scientists for a while. Yossel. So you know, logically, the target is groups to the right of the Aguda, as I said before. And so in America, that would be Satmar and Lubavitch, for example, right? These were to the right of the, I'll say it again, right of the Aguda, especially in those years, the Lubavitch was anti-Israel. Now, he was in the process of changing. But he did change. But in those years, those who were Lubavitch know what I'm talking about, those years, they were very anti-Zionists, all the rest of it. And they, as I say before, they don't care about number one, it's Gedolei Torah over here. In Europe, the Mossad discovers a whole subculture they never knew about. I don't think most of us do, unless you're European. We have some Europeans in the audience. Most of us don't know. There's Antwerp, there's Strasbourg, there's London, there's Switzerland. We in Baltimore and places like that, we don't know from this stuff. We've heard of Israel. We've heard of Bnei Brak. We've heard of places in America like Lakewood and Muncie and Baltimore. You know, who knows about Aix-les-Bains and those sort of, and the Europeans do, but we don't. And this is Ramosha Soloveitchik. Nobody knows it. You saw Moshe Soloveitchik, they think it's the father of J.B. Soloveitchik. This is Ramosha Soloveitchik of Zurich, okay? Which was, they had a yeshiva in Lugano and then in Lucerne. These are people who found themselves different. His Briskerov's grandson, and it's a Soloveitchik, you know. And what do you call it? They found themselves in 1939 at the beginning of the Holocaust in Switzerland to their good mazel. One of them was Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman, for example, and the right place and right time. And they settled down and they make yeshivas and learning circles and all these kind of places, especially when the Holocaust is over. Here's a whole tale of a subculture that I wish I had the time to do justice to, but I don't tonight, of, as I say, a whole different little set of movements of a very strong, shall I say, ultra-Orthodox vibrancy in Europe in a time when European Jewry is in general collapsing. Maybe I'll find time later this semester to get into that. But let's put it this way. Yasser is probably among all these places, and he was. Because in that time that I'm talking about, in 1962, there's very big sympathy and support for the Torah Karta. You know what I said? More than today, I would say. But at that time, for sure. Quite anti-Zionist, hard to penetrate, but like Jews, a big blabbermouth. And so they start to pick up a trail. You know, you sit back at a shul, you sit here, you sit there, go hang around the kosher restaurants. Pretty, people yak, it goes, and bushes in Bar Park, as they say. And they start to pick up a trail of a woman who might be the key to the whole thing, maybe. Now here we come into a remarkable tale of Madeleine Farai, who's a French woman, not Jewish, born in Calais in 1920, marries a Gentile in 1939, has a son named Claude, gets divorced in 1942. She's a successful businesswoman. She participates in the French resistance. Then the war's over. She's not Jewish at all, but she's a spiritual seeker. That's her nature. Unusual. And, not everybody's like her parents, by the way, are socialists, they're Marxists, they have no time for religion, she writes this, and when she talks to the local priest and she's not any satisfaction, she's somebody who's really looking, okay, which is rare. Now there's one in France, but it's like that. And it's hard to get married when you're that type. Right? Hard to get married because outside of the non-Jewish world as well as the Jewish world. The struggle for Israel in 1948 to 45-48 captures her imagination. Is this the Bible coming true? She visits Israel as a Gentile in 1949. That's very unusual. And she becomes an ardent Zionist. She finally comes back to France and makes the big step. She converts to Judaism in 1950. But reform, which is not a popular thing in French Jewry, because reform is very tiny. Okay? Again, we're not mostly familiar with this, but in Europe, the reform movement never really took off the way people imagined. But what happened was that the Orthodox groups moved to the left, shall we say, to accommodate the Baal Ba'atim, so it's the United Synagogue in England, similar things in France. To this day, in France and Italy and Holland and England, there are local rabbinical schools which graduate local rabbi for local communities, and they've never stopped being Orthodox, although they've always been very, very modern. And it's a fascinating subject, and like I said, I can't do justice to it now. But in France, that's absolutely what happened. The reform movement never took off, so the overwhelming majority of Jews in France are just not observant. They're assimilated, but they're not reformed. So when she starts introducing herself as somebody Jewish, most of the Jews say, "You're not Jewish," So she said, "Oh, I didn't know that." And so in 1951, she converts Orthodox, okay, with her son. And she comes to Shomer Shabbos. So we're dealing here with what we call a Ger Tzedek. And the reason I say Ger Tzedek, many people don't know what I'm talking about, but there's like 3 levels of Gerus. There's a Ger Tzedek and a Ger, and then what I always call because we don't know what to do with it, right? And a Ger, my students all make fun of me. He said the Ger Tzedek is like Ruth. You understand? A spiritual thing. So they were looking for the truth, and they found it. with no ulterior motive whatsoever. This is a very high madrega. We mention them in the davening all the time. Al tzadikim, al chasidim, al ziknim, al chabisro, al geriat tzedek, al place of rim, right? The ger is a very high level. And then there's something called a ger, which is almost always the result of marriage. There's ulterior motive. And whatever it says in books, by the time it's all over, if the person who converts really keeps the religion, fine, they're as Jewish as you and I. Understand? We would perhaps prefer that Jewish boy marry Jewish girl, Jewish boy met Jewish girl met Jewish boy, but it happened. And it happens. And if the partner who converts says, I'm going to be Shomer Shabbos and all the rest, and they mean it, then they're just as Jewish as anybody else. And then there's a third level going, because, are you going to keep anything? Not really. Yeah, no. The husband doesn't keep anything. And so what are they joining for? And then they don't mean it, and they say they keep the mitzvah, they don't keep the mitzvah. And then this is the big problem we have today. What do you do with them? You understand? This one says they're Jewish, this one says they're not Jewish, you have all the problems. But the lady I'm speaking over here, without question, is an outstanding example of category A. Because she didn't meet anybody all the rest of it. She really was looking in her life for a spiritual home, for finding God. Let's be very direct about it. And in her case, she found it in Judaism, and as we'll see, she even moved farther and farther to right as she went on. She becomes, in the early 50s, part of a fascinating, unique French-Jewish term Derech Eretz movement that none of us, if we're not French, know what I'm talking about. These are names I don't think maybe you've heard of Levinas, but you haven't heard of Andre Nair and Leon Ashkenazi. These are, how should I put it? These are French Jews with an excellent secular education, and they're also passionately interested in Jewish, and this one learned a little more, this one learned a little less, and they really wrapped up in their Judaism, including the Gemara and all the rest of it, and they tried to mix together in the French way, not in the German way, kind of a turn Derech Eretz, which is highly eclectic and intellectual, and it's really remarkable. I still remember many years, nobody, like I said, if you're not from European, you know what I'm talking about. But if you are European, you do know what I'm talking about. I remember a million years ago, I was once on a date in Israel with a French girl in Israel, a million years ago. Million and a half.
This is before you were married?
What's that? You're not supposed to ask that question. They said, no, wait a second. And I remember when a girl from Strasbourg, and she said, they're having a shiur or something that week. What's the shiur? The Maharal and Proust. Okay? Now, believe me, those who heard of the Maharal never heard of Proust, and those who heard of Proust never heard of the Maharal. You understand? No, but it's very, very typical of it's a fascinating kind of a thing in these areas. In Baltimore, it ain't going to happen. Don't worry, you're safe. The point is, so she becomes part of this intellectualist, Jewish, Orthodox, modern Orthodox circle, and as a matter of fact, Leon Ashkenazi becomes very big. We don't read French and Jewish books about Judaism. There's a ton of them, and he's like the big guru. They call him Manitou, the Great Spirit. She converts him to Zionism, believe it or not, to religious Zionism. So she was, SHTARKES religious Zionism as him. But listen, she's 31? I don't blame her. She wants to get married. I don't blame her. She meets a young, unmarried French rabbi, a modern Orthodox French rabbi. They date, but in the end, his family's going to raise hell if he marries a Gilris. Now, it's not right, because she's a Ger Tzedek. But it's not right. But on the other hand, it happens. It's right after the Holocaust. Only one person speaks out for her. Ironically, a super for me. Right? Rabbi Avram Mises. I think these names don't mean anything to you. He will become the head of the Torah Karta. You have no idea who the people we're dealing with over here. Rabbi Mises grew up in Russia, like 1901, something like that. His parents died when he was a baby. He lived off of bread from the street. He became very frum. He learns, in Slutsky Yeshiva. Communism takes over. He doesn't care. I'm going to read you. He will run a yeshiva in Minsk in the 1920s under communism called the Yeshiva Mesiras Nefesh. And they don't mean that as a cliche. You understand? It's Stalin. It's Mesiras Nefesh. Give up your life. I want to read you this little thing I pulled from the internet, the Wikipedia, what it says about. Listen to this. He was arrested a bunch of times. what do you call it? Himshich Sham Shah Esher. He eventually was under Stalin. He kept doing what he wanted to do, and he went to Stalin in Siberia for 10 years. Shamar Shabbat. In Stalin's gulag, Hinech Tefillin. Shetzlich lahasig. I don't know how the heck you get tefillin in this sort of thing. V'yashav b'sukkah shebana b'bor mechusa b'schach. You understand? He made himself a sukkah in Siberia from branches in a pit. The NKVD, the guards found him and beat him up. Let's say mistake. He wouldn't leave the sukkah. I said, it's a miracle they didn't shoot him. It's unbelievable. He would to go to Toivel, which a man doesn't even have to do. He would break the ice in Siberia and go to Toivel. So who are you talking about? You're talking about like this. And right after the war, he was able to get out of Russia, and he's part of the yeshiva movement that tries to build little yeshivas, at least in France after the war. And a person like this is very spiritual. And so he goes, Ger Tzedek, what's the problem? So it's ironic. In her big crisis, the modern Orthodox act racist, and the ultra-Orthodox act anti-racist. This is obviously, in my opinion, a formative influence. In 1954, she moves to, you can't make this up. In 1954, she moves to Israel because she wants to get married. She brings her son Claude and puts him in Kibbutz Yavne, and then the big KBY, like the high school. This is when KBY is just starting, Karen B'Yavne. He is not Claude anymore, he's Uriel. Okay? Now, you understand, the mother was a convert, and the son, she schlepped him along. So he's a convert also. He's not as stark as she is, but nevertheless, he does it. She doesn't find the shidduch. She moves back to France. Her son's in yeshiva, in KBY. She moved back to France in the mid-50s, but instead of that modern Orthodox Maral Proust gang, she starts hanging around a different set of people. The yeshiva world of EICHMANN. I don't think anybody even knows what I'm talking about. Look over here. Here's Lake Geneva, and at one end is Zurich, the other end is in France, another resort, EICHMANN. On the way is Montreux and Geneva, very classy area of Europe, very beautiful area of Europe. Here's a tale. I'll just give you a little bit. Long ago, smart people realized something that people either like or don't like, and that is, there's no survival in Judaism without yeshivas. That's what we discovered in the 20th century, 19th, 20th century. There is no other tactic that will work. All the others sooner or later fail. It's just, a lot of people don't like to hear it, but it is what it is. And therefore, there was a movement, sort of spontaneous, in different places, particularly in the 20th century, to set up yeshivas in different places. Some worked and some didn't work. There was a Rabbi Weil, Ernest Weil, who in Alsace. Alsace is a place of very long-standing old traditionalist Judaism. I mean, many became non-from in the modern era, but many stayed. And this is a place that switched from France to Germany, right? Used to be part of France, then it was under Bismarck in Germany. And he grew up, he was born in 1868, so he grew up under Germany. And because of that, Ernest Weil, he went to the Hildesheimer Seminary. The really from guy was a rabbi in many communities in Alsace, in the area of Strasbourg. And after he was rabbi for decades, he finally achieved his goal. He was very active with the youth. He was a very charismatic individual. And he made a yeshiva near Strasbourg in a small town. And he got Simcha Wasserman, the son of Elchanan Wasserman, to be the head. And they started to get guys together because he said, this is the only way Judaism will survive in France, that's for sure. Called Yeshiva Chachmei Tzarfas. Simcha Wasserman moves to America in the late 30s. And so they bring in Rabbi Chaikin. Again, these are well-known names in Europe, not here. Who was a student of the Chavetz Chaim. And they want to make a yeshiva. World War II breaks out. This is Europe. So the Rosh Yeshivas are drafted in the French Foreign Legion, believe it or not. And that's a movie, Beaugest, But anyhow, the war's over. And when the war's over, the Holocaust is over. And you have all these refugees in France, and nearby is Dachau and Buchenwald and all that. And there were some spiritual heroes that tried, Mordechai Pogromansky and people like that, to make little yeshivas to be collate, to bring this up, whatever they can save, the Sheretz HaPleita of the Sheretz HaPleita, if I can use that term. And they want to revive this yeshiva that fell apart because of the Holocaust, and they bring it to EICHMANN, which is a resort in the middle of France, on the Swiss border, as you can see, on Lake Geneva. So in other words, here's a little episode that nobody knows about, and it's successful. I think it's still there, I believe, and very, what should I put it this way? They sympathize with the Torah Karta. Right? This is not an attempt, as I say, to marry Proust and Maral. To hell with Proust. Not that he's a guy, because they're Jew, but nevertheless, down with him. And very right-wing sort of place. She loves it. That's the point. Isn't that interesting? No, she's on a spiritual journey and she ain't finished yet. She is introduced to the yeshiva world. She laps it up. She would love to get married and live in a place like that, like you say today, in some yeshiva community and all the rest of it, but it doesn't happen quite yet. So this is quite a story. All right? She calls herself Ruth ben David. So she got the son in KBY, and the mother's moving to the right wing of the Yehuda, and even beyond the Yehuda. So there's a mother and a son, but they're hashkafa-wise in different places. In 1959, the son wants to enlist in Tzahal, in the IDF. She doesn't like that at all, because by this time, she's beyond the Yehuda. So she says, talk to Rabbi Maises, because he's a friend of ours. And so here you have the son. He goes from KBY. He himself is a convert from France. And he goes to talk to the head of the Torah Karta. What should I do? My mother told me to talk to you. Rabbi Maises says, if I try to tell this guy to dump the Israeli, he's not going to list, stay one more year in the yeshiva. That's what he says. That's what you should do. And by the way, if you're looking for activities, I want to sign you up for the SCARLET Pimpernels. Okay? Because we're moving Yussel around to save the boy from fate worse than death. They want to send him back to Russia. And this Rabbi Maises takes this French guy, who wasn't even Jewish originally, from KBY and says, you're going to join our group, and he does. Okay? The police search gets more thorough in 1960, at the time when this is happening. So Rabbi Maises, who obviously, if he survived Stalin, was an inventive person, he gets the idea of smuggling Yussel out of the country. But how are you going to do that? It's the Mapai state. Like you say, it's they have border controls, and very strict border controls. How can you do it? Who can do it? Talking to the son, to Uriel, he said, wait a minute, I remember your mother from France. I tried to get her married over there. She's a French citizen. She has a Gaisha passport, and she knows Europe like the back of her hand. And she's a very smart person. Uriel talks to his mother, and he said, this will definitely help you with shidduchim in the Haredi world. And for her part, she was very close with this Rabbi Maises, who had backed her before. And so Uriel says, she flies to Israel to join her son. The son gets a hold of Yussel. He dyes the hair. He dresses up. The boy's a girl. They give him a forged passport. In other words, the son forges a passport. You learn a lot of things in yeshivas, and they successfully exfiltrate mother and child out of the country. Right? It's amazing. They get him through because the guards wouldn't think this. It's like a movie, They travel to Europe. First to Aix-les-Bains, then to Switzerland, then to Antwerp, getting all kinds of underground support. Because whenever you go to these communities, especially the type that I just described, they're helping. No, they see it as a mitzvah. You understand? For a while, Yussel, for example, is enrolled in the Cheder in Lucerne, which is under Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik. He originally had yeshiva in Lugano. Again, these are, small, very intense yeshiva environment, and they ain't talking to nobody. Haredi rabbis of the type I'm talking about praise the mother for her efforts. I'm talking about Ruth Ben David, the French lady. And meanwhile, the state of Israel is freaking out. Okay? Now, eventually, she smuggles Yussel, we're going to get to Hot, dressed as a girl into the United States of America. Gets it by the customs in this country. First, she goes to Vineland, New Jersey, and then I just found this out yesterday, and then to Philly, to our own Rabbi EICHMANN. Okay, because the other one called him, he said, I have a guy over here, and this is a mitzvah, and we need somebody to help out over here. And they take him in. He said he was dressed like a girl, and he helped her. But after a couple days, Rabbi EICHMANN said, is this really right? He asked the Rosh Hashivas in Philly, and they say you should ask for Aaron Cutler. And he tells the lady, I'm going to ask Aaron Cutler. Aaron Cutler is a dangerous left-winger to her. You understand that? That's in the Yehuda. They want to give him back. So she says, thank you very much. She comes right away. He takes the girl, the boy, and disappears. Eventually they end up in Satmar in Williamsburg. Okay? So this is quite remarkable. The Satmar Rebbe placed him with a trusted family. After all, he's got no problem with this whatsoever. Right? Smuggling Jews, I want you to understand, from police is an old Jewish practice. You had to do it all the time in Europe. My mother grew up in a small town, Bardejov, in Slovakia, and she told me that when she was a little girl, old people would say like this: if you go to the shul in the middle of the night, it's a ghost. It's Mason with Talesa. And they have a whole minyan, and they do Yamod, and so on and so forth. They freaked her out, and they gave her nightmares, and things like this. When she grew up, she discovered that they used to tell this to the kids, because they used to smuggle in refugees to hide them in the shul. They didn't want the kids to come and look and tell. So you don't understand what the Eastern European culture was. So you tell me you're going to take somebody, and now you and I are Americans. You say, what do you have to hide in America for? The Sat Rebbe is not even a question. The evil Ben Gurion is like Robespierre. This is Scarlet Pimpernel. So anyhow, the Mossad is hot on the trail by 1962. They suspect Satmar because that's an obvious thing. And so Issa Harel calls J. Edgar Hoover. And he says, make a search. And they search the summer camps, Camp Aguda, Camp Chamberlain, all these type of places, the usual suspects. So it's a wonderful, if I had time, I would say J. Edgar Hoover and underneath, Afo Yasala, because the FBI comes looking with a very poor description of who it is. I mean, they went to Camp Aguda, and these kind of places, and are you hiding any kid over here and all the rest of it. Now, after a lot of dead ends, in Antwerp, the Mossad hears about this remarkable French Guillauris, and if you're Israel, you start to say click, 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 you start put two and two together and say that she must be involved, but how? He's trying to figure out how. Meanwhile, the story switches back to Israel. Uriel, the son, is experiencing a late-teen Frumkeit crisis. It happens. Not in Baltimore, of course, but it happens. So he's got a French passport. He travels to Lebanon and Jordan on the French passport. This brings him to the attention of the Shin Bet. What's that all about? And the head of the Shin Bet, Amos Manor, wants to investigate him. Is he an enemy agent? They thought he's connected with telling one Eli Cohn. I know about it. Now, then they find out that it's not true. They just have a weirdo on their hands. So then, Uriel, when he comes back, is drafted in the army, in the Israeli army. The Shin Bet, though, is aware now of his existence and his biography. It's mid-1962. As a soldier, it's standard operating procedure in the Tzahal that any letters you send overseas are read by the censor. Right? That's normal. In this case, the letters are to his mother in France. They notice, one letter is to a place in Switzerland, another place is in Marseille, another place is, it's most unusual. You get it? At different addresses. This arouses the notice of the censor. There are even a few references, how's the boy? And so the censor doesn't know what to do. He passes it to the Shin Bet. The Shin Bet passes it to the Mamuneh, to Israel. And it's a click, 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 ding, ding, ding. Right? He starts to put it together. Through these letters, the woman Ruth Ben David is located and watched. Now begins like a Jean Le Carre movie. They follow her, they trace her, this, that, and the other. And she went in one place as a blonde and came in as a brunette, all that sort of thing. She says, very good. And the Mossad agents notice that she's a cool and calculated customer. A plan is devised. She owned property. She was selling a piece of property. She sells property to a guy. The guy says, I'll pay you a good price. Let's go to the lawyer. They go to the lawyer. The lawyer's house is really a Mossad. She walks in the house, and it's like a movie. And they lock the doors and say, you're now under control of the Mossad. There they go. She will not, they interrogate her. She won't talk. What are you going to do? Amos Manor, meaning the head of the Shin Bet in Israel, calls in the son. Confess. You are destroying the state of Israel. You're in the Tzahal. So you're not crazy like your mother. You don't want to destroy Israel. Right? We're not trying to do nothing bad. No legal action will be taken against you or against your mother. We just want the boy. Okay? Uriel spills the beans. The news is flashed to Harel in the Paris house with the mother. Right? The whole confession. Issa Harel tells the mother her son is blabbed. She says, I don't believe it. And if it is, he's not my son. But eventually she believes it. What happens next is not exactly clear. Either she breaks down and tells where the kid is, or she claims that she didn't break down, but some other chassid blabbed on it, which is also totally possible. Either way, Israel finds out where the kid is. In the United States of America, in Manhattan, in New York, Israel calls Ben Gurion Ben-Gurion calls the Israeli Attorney General. The Israeli Attorney General calls the American Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy. Maybe you've heard of him. Bobby Kennedy said, I guess, okay, we're going to bring in the feds and we're going to raid this place. But the head of the FBI in New York said like this, it's New York, it's Saturday morning, wait till Shabbos over, just take it from me. You don't need this in the paper. It's a few months before the congressional elections. We don't need this. And so they wait until Havdalah, and then they raid 126 Penn Street in Williamsburg. Okay, anybody live there? And sure enough, the kids there, they say, where's his papers and all the rest of it, and they find it. Yosef is then flown to Israel. Here it is.
לאחר 2.5 של מאבק בלתי פוסק וחיפושים מייגעים, נתגלה כשהוא בריא ושלם.
He wasn't mistreated. That's the grandfather.
במבצע מיוחד עלה בידי מערכת יומן כרמל הרצליה לראיין את יוסה לשוחמכר מיד עם הגיעו לישראל.
אתה שמח שבאת
You happy you're in Israel?
כן.
It's the mother.
שמח להיות את אבא?
It's the father.
איפה לפניי?
נו, ולאמא נשיקה.
ולאמא נשיקה.
In other words, from the point of view of the Israeli news, a happy ending. That's my point. But since there's a cultural chasm over here, the different reactions to the return reflect that chasm, separating the Haredim from the other Israelis. Right? One group is happy, the other group is sad. Yasser grows up to be a Chiloni Masorti, as you would say today. Yeah, he lives in Israel. Even though Satmar brainwashed him as a kid, turns out when you're dealing with a kid, it's more like a light rinse. And so Kabbalah Kach Polto, you know, whatever came in, it came out, they changed it within a year. Let's put it this way, 1 year later he was in public school. You see? And because we live in the age, my friends, of the internet, so we have surreal phenomena. I found, this is Yosef speaking, in fact, on behalf of Shabbat now, like they keep in South Africa, everybody should do Shabbat.
Hi, my name is Yossi Schumacher. Probably you know me from my history yesterday. I just met the Rabbi Ben Zion Platzko, and he showed me the site, Shabbat.com. I was amazed. It's a huge, effective tool to bring in all sorts of people, Judaism, to bring them together and to listen, to see each other, and just maybe to come more friendly, more to understand each other. And that's what I believe, that we as Jews of the world can change things by just being united and bringing all kinds of people and all kinds of ideas, just bring them together and talk about it. God bless you. Shabbat Shalom, and see you on Shabbat.com.
So if I was politically correct, I would end right here, but I have a little bit more to go to bring out all the dirt. Historians will tell you, and they're not wrong necessarily, that Yosel helped take down Israel and Ben-Gurion, because since they had to take so many people off of this, they weren't watching the spies, the German scientists. Therefore, there was a whole misunderstanding what that was, and Ben-Gurion fired Israel, and then later on Ben-Gurion quit. And part of the reason, it's true, is because of the misuse, shall we say? I'm talking about from a bitchoni point of view. The misuse of the Mossad, that you can't take your eyes off the other guy. So that's part of it. Interestingly, Yosel also kind of took down the Torah Karta. Now, how did he do that? She still wants to get married. She was like 44, 45 years old. The lady, hold on, he still wants to get married. At that time, who are you going to marry? You're 45 years old. So there aren't that many single guys that, if they are, why are they single? In Mea Sharim. In America, you could hear. In Mea Sharim, it doesn't happen. So, there's a widower. So, happy. But so happens that a lot of the big rabbis at that time, the wives died. And so a question like this, the son, Uriel, he's the shadchan, can you please? He's like this, I would like to get my mother would like to get married. By this time, she is so far to the right, she would love to be the Rebbe of the Torah Karta. You get what I'm saying? She started in French Catholic, but she's obviously finds in this tremendous spirituality. I'm not saying what you do. I'm talking what she did, right? She went, and it doesn't, and she, shaving the head and all this is fine. You get it? All this is, she finds tremendous spirituality. So she's an eligible female, and what do you call it? There are a number of these rabbis, some of the big shots, their wives had died within the last year and a half, including Rabbi Dovid Katz and Rabbi Jungreis and Rabbi Amram Blau. Now, these are all famous names in the Torah Karta, not necessarily in Baltimore. Rabbi Sokolovsky, who was like, Mises had just died in 1961. And so Sokolovsky was the one who took up her cause. And he said, I want to make a shidduch, because we want to do everything honorably, with you and Amram Blau, who was the head of the Torah Karta. Okay? Amram Blau was 25 years older than her. And he said, I'm sure she's not going to marry me. And she says, I'm willing if you're willing. And so, after thinking about it for a while, he says, then I propose to you that we should get married. All hell breaks loose, because he has 10 kids. 4 boys and 6 girls. The mother had died 11 months earlier. So the Israeli papers have a field day. This is a scandal. You understand? He's marrying a Gioris, and she's a French woman, and by the time the Israeli papers get finished with it, she was a cabaret dancer, you know. I'm telling you, she blew up the German nightclubs, and all kind of stuff, you know. Listen, Ma'ariv, Haaretz, it doesn't get better than that, you know. It was what do you call it, feeding frenzy, you know. And what do you call it? His children say this is a big piece. It's beneath your dignity. Rabbi Sokolovsky says, why is it beneath the dignity? She's a ger tzedek. There's nothing wrong with this in the world. It's not like he married some girl and then she wasn't Jewish, he wants to convert or something. She's a ger tzedek, and not only a ger tzedek, even by the Torah Karta standards, she's a hero. You understand? No, she's genuinely from. You can't deny that. You see? And so what you have is a clash of sensibilities. And they do get married, but all hell broke loose. As you can see over here, they turned from a controversial couple to, it was all over the papers, and his kids, what shall I say, broke off all relations with him. And Rabbi Sokolovsky performed the wedding in Bnei Brak, because they couldn't get married in Israel. In Yerushalayim, he got exiled, so to speak, to Bnei Brak. And like I say, this really messed up the Torah Karta. You understand? Because they spent 2-3 years on this scandal. And they had to leave town, and so it's a little bit, L'havdil, Elef Havdalas, it's a little bit like the Prince of Wales and Wallace Simpson, right? There she is. In Nusach Torah Karta, he gave it all up for the woman he loved, because he had a big position in that world, and he did give it up. It's you know, I mean, it sounds funny to us to even think of romance within the context of the Torah Karta, but I'm wrong. Like I say, you can't make it up. I'm wrong. And so he married her. I'll say it for a 4th time. He said, and what's the problem? She's a ger tzedek. You understand? She's a ger tzedek. So anyhow, I suppose she was worth it. So she becomes the ultra-Orthodox Helen of Troy. The face that launched 1,000 Gemaras. Right? She outlived him. She didn't. She used to come to Baltimore, by the way, because years later. You know, he got okay. I know people remember. He used to stay by Chazenbaum, if that means anything. I remember for years ago. Wait a second. In later years, you know what she did was she was in the Torah Karta. He came back. It wasn't the same in the Torah Karta before, but she had a French passport, and if she wanted to, she could take a French identity, and she used to try to see if there are Jews in the Arab country that she can rescue because she has a French background. And I remember once, I wasn't able to find it, but I do remember once in Begin's time that there was one case where the Arabs had a Jewish shavui, thing, and nothing worked. But she went to Arafat because she was from the Torah Karta, and she got him out. You understand? And Begin said, like, thank you to somebody. She said, I wouldn't even talk to you, But like I say, this to conclude. What does this case show us? It shows us that that it developed in Israel, 2 parallel cultures that they couldn't really have any contact with each other. 2 parallel ways of doing Judaism. 2 parallel ways of understanding what's right and what's wrong. And it wasn't something that was going to go away. If anything, of course, as we know, it's intensified. So I conclude, as I always do, by asking the eternal question: why do you waste your time reading fiction? Good night.